Oh, okay, thank you, Mrs. President Amira. So you have the floor if you have something to tell before the beginning, or should we just start?
You
Yeah.
can start, Musa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the honor. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our Africa ELTA webinar series. So today we have the honor to welcome Maureen Guevara Garcia. Yeah, she loves teaching and learning about different areas. This is why she holds a master's degrees in teaching English, project management, and business administration. By the way, also, she is currently studying a master in technology and innovation. And she has 17 years of experience in higher education and currently works at Universidad Tecnicia Nacional Costa Rica. That might mean the Technical University, National University of Costa Rica. For Maureen, this activity is a great opportunity to share and learn from each other experience and best practices. And that's why Africa ELTA, in the case also of promoting the teaching and learning, we're really initiating such kind of opportunity. Welcome, Maureen, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Musa, Amira. Thank you for the invitation. It is a real pleasure for me to be here with you today and share about a topic that I really like, that is about task-based learning. So I hope that we can really take advantage. And if you have any question, don't hesitate to ask. You can use the chat, right? And also, I will be very happy to give you some ideas. So yes. So this presentation is about, like a practical guide for applying task-based learning during the language learning process. As Musa was mentioning, I have some years of experience working in higher education, and most of them have been working with this methodology. So I will be very happy to tell you a little bit more about task-based instruction and also the task-based cycle, so that we can have like a clear idea what it means and how to implement it during the learning process. But I also am going to share with you some useful examples so that you can see that it's not maybe that difficult. Probably at the beginning, it can be a little bit, confusing, but later when you just start working with it, you're gonna see its advantages. So let's start with an introduction to task-based. Probably you have heard about task-based. So I'm just going to share with you some concepts or keywords that are really important. So we have input, learning outcome, feedback, interaction, learning environment, context, and learning process. And why are these concepts important when we talk about task-based? Well, because each one of these concepts or ideas are relevant during the whole learning, process, during each one of the stages that we are going to check about the task-based cycle. Just try to keep in your minds these concepts, because we are going to use them through the whole presentation. Okay, now regarding a task, what is a task? Sometimes it's kind of difficult to define it. So I really like Noonan's definition about a task, especially because he mentions that a task is that piece of classroom work, but actually I would say that is that piece of work that involves learners in comprehending, manipulating, producing, and interacting in the target language. So it's how our students are going to use the language to communicate effectively. So we are going also not just to base on grammatical knowledge in order to express meaning, but also how they use the language to communicate effectively. It is more than the form, right? It is the why of the language. And this is why it's important that we use different methodologies so that our students are able to use the language in a communicative way. So something that is also very important and that we need to remember is that the task based on this approach, it's a visible outcome, okay, that allows us to understand or to really check if our students are understanding, if they are really learning. Can our students describe past activities? Can they describe their future plans? Can they talk about themselves? More than the use of the language, it is if they know how to use it in different contexts. Okay, so also something important is that the content that we teach should be selected based on the students' needs and know their wants. Sometimes, I don't know if that happens in your context, but in our context, in our country, or in my experience, when we are teaching English and we are, teaching like past tense activities, students ask for those lists of verbs in the past because they think that if they have a list of verbs, they can be able to speak in the past. And then they realized that even if they have the list of verbs, irregular verbs, they don't know how to use them and they don't know how to pronounce them. So that's why the content should be selected based on what they really need and what they really are going to use in their daily basis. Also, they need to interact, and that is why it's important with this approach to promote interaction in the target language. They have to talk, they have to speak to each other in the classroom. They have even to have their cell phones, like the settings in English. They have to be in constant contact with the language. The use of authentic material also promotes learning. And when we talk about authentic material, it's about the use, of newspaper articles, digital, or maybe videos, or even short stories that are real in the target language so that they can use it, they can learn not just from textbooks, because sometimes it is not like the language that we use in everyday conversations. So it is very important that they learn and they use this material and they understand maybe different expressions, maybe idioms or synonyms. Sometimes when you ask your students, hi, how are you? They only understand how are you. But if you change the how are you for how you doing, probably they don't get it. So when we give them the opportunity to access to different material, to different samples of the language, they can really start sounding more fluent in English. Also, they have to be given the opportunity to analyze their own learning process. And that's why I really like the task-based cycle, because in that way, students can really analyze if they are using the language properly. And also we as teachers can really see their progress. We can analyze and we can also make, decisions for the next session. If we identify that our students are having some, difficulties with a special topic. In my case, in this moment, I'm teaching past tense and my students are having some problems with the ed pronunciation, and they are get confused with the was and the irregular and the did and didn't, etc. So what I try to do is that after I apply this cycle, I reflect on the learning process and I try to okay, now I identify that my students are having these problems, so how can I try to give them the opportunity to improve. So I again go with the cycle, and then my students can see if they are, okay, now they are understanding or not, or if we need to reinforce a specific area of the language, etc. I'm going to give you actually one example about that later. And something important is that there should be a link between the language that the students are going to learn in the classroom and the one that they are going to use or apply outside the class. Because sometimes we focus more on, on the language itself. And sometimes when they go and they are going to talk, outside the class, they are going to use another one. And this happens because, of course, we teach them formal English, but sometimes we also need to make sure that they know how to use formal and informal English, and they can even identify the context where they can use it. So, okay, these expressions are useful if you are in a job interview, for example, or if you're talking to your supervisor, your teachers, and this is vocabulary or expressions that you use for with your partners or with your family, close friends, etc. So it is really important when we apply the task-based learning that we make sure the context in which students are using the language. And feedback and constant monitoring are key elements so that we can really, our students can get and can understand and can improve. If we monitor just at the end, when they, they do another presentation and we say, yes, this is not correct, not correct, not correct. So maybe they are not going to have the chance to do it again. If we give them feedback during the whole process since the beginning, so they can start, working on that, they can start monitoring themselves and self-regulating themselves. And that's why we can also promote some metacognitive strategies so that they can realize about their own progress. So these are just ideas for you to keep, again in mind when we are applying task-based learning. Now, let's talk about the cycle. Maybe you have heard about it. And here in the university where I worked, we just came up with one extra, step for the cycle that is called the schema activation. So we're going to talk about the schema activation. We are going to talk about pre-tasks, main tasks, and post-tasks. And we're going to go one by one. And the idea is that I'm going to give you some examples of how to implement it. Remember that this is a cycle, okay? So we are going to just go one by one. And then if we need, we have to start again. And I know that sometimes we think about our classes and we have limited time. So I can give you some tips on how to handle that. I don't know in your cases, but in my case, we have 3-hour lessons. So we have to take into consideration the time so that we can apply the task base in an effective way. And that also requires, of course, practice. So let's talk about the first step, and that is the schema activation. It is really important that we can identify our students' previous knowledge. And when we talk about schema activation, it is not like just, asking them, okay, what do you know about the future, about the verb to be? No, it's not about the language itself, but about its use, about how you use it. So for example, you can ask them, okay, what did you do yesterday? Oh, what did you do in your last vacation? Oh, what are your future plans? So you can, start asking them some questions, or maybe they can listen to a specific sounds and they can give you the idea of what they are, listening. Or you can even show them a picture and ask them, what do you see in the picture? Why are we doing these activities? Because we want to know if they know some specific vocabulary, some language, or if they don't know anything and they start speaking in their native language. Okay, and they start asking, oh, teacher, how do you say this in English? Ah, okay. So that in this stage, you realize if they know about the topic or not, or if they have, like a specific area in which you need to emphasize it. So you can do some activities as brainstorming, picture analysis. They can listen to sounds so that they can really identify what you're talking about. You can show them a map or some menus, or newspapers. There are so many activities that you can do. But in this stage, the most important aspect is that you don't give them input because you want to know what they know. So don't give them input. So just ask them questions in general Okay, okay, what about your last vacation? Oh, what did you see in this video? Or maybe you can show them an object and you can say, what is this? To see if they can identify the object or not. Okay, but you don't say, okay, this is a cell phone or this is a camera. No, you don't give them input because you want to know if they know or if they already have heard about the topic, etc. And what is the difference? Maybe this is a common question. What is the difference between a schema activation and a warm-up? Probably you are very familiar with warm-ups. And what is the difference is very, very simple. The warm-up is more like an activity, you know, like a very, like you move, probably there is movement, there is a physical activity, etc. And it may or may not be related to the topic, okay, that you are going to develop or the learning outcome. So the warm-up is more like a previous activity that you can do so that you can, you know, get the students' attention, and later you can have the schema activation. Okay, so maybe you can ask your students to stand up and raise your hand, or let's go outside, or just some, you know, stretching before the class, and that's it. Maybe it's not related to the topic. The schema activation, yes, it is totally related to the topic because it is the first step in the cycle. I don't know so far if there is any question or just continue. You tell me. Can I
You can
continue? Yeah,
continue. Yeah, continue. The question will come after. Yeah. And if
great,
they have a
perfect,
question, you can write on the chat box as well. Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, and I will let you
So
know. Mhm.
thank you. Now we talk about, you know, the pre-task. Okay, in this stage for me is one of course all of them are important, but in this stage is when you provide input to your students, but this input is going to be comprehensible input for them. Also, they are going to, you know, students are going to, you know, start getting ready for the main task, and we are going to give them the information or this input from simple to more complex. We are going to give them models of the language. We are going to give them, you know, the language that they are going to need. What is this? For example, let's continue talking about describing past activities. So as teachers, we need to think, okay, when we are planning, we need to start thinking, okay, if my students at the end of the class, the learning outcome is that they describe their past activities, what do they need? They are going to need probably to ask questions. They are going to need like sentences, you know, in the past using regular or irregular verbs. They are going to need time expressions, yesterday, last week, etc. Okay, and then if I want them, you know, if I want them to be more specific, I can think about like using some questions or, you know, yes or no questions, WA questions, and so forth. So now as a teacher, I already know, I already identify the language that they are going to need for describing past activities. Okay, now the next step when we are planning is, okay, how am I going to, you know, or how my students are going to have access to this input? Maybe you can give them a dialogue so that they can start, you know, practicing the dialogue in pairs or in groups, or maybe face to face or with different activities. Maybe they are going to watch a video with a specific language, or they are going to have a reading, or they are going to, you know, have like a small part of a podcast or a movie. You can be very creative in that. And you have the language there. So students are going to analyze it. They are going to practice. You are going to explain to them the difference between the use of was and did, maybe the pronunciation, some details, but more, it is more about the use of the language. Okay, and they are going to keep practicing. In this stage, students are going to get ready. They are going to, you know, be exposed to different input, to listening activities, to reading activities, writing, etc. Something important during the pre-task is that it is a little bit more controlled, because you as teacher need to monitor students' performance, students' understanding. Okay, so you have to check if they are doing an activity, you know, like these activities that are very common, like find someone who, and you start listening to them that they are having problems asking questions. Okay, so you have to come back a little bit and check that specific topic, or you know, or clarify some of the language that they are using, etc. During the pre-task, input is the most important one. And the input that your students are exposed to is the input that they are going to use when they are going to produce in the next stage. Okay, so when we talk about the main task, now the students are going to carry out the learning outcome. The students are the ones who are going to be independent. Remember that the pre-task, it's a little bit more controlled. We as teachers, we have more control of the environment, of the activities, etc. But then once that they are ready, once that they already have the input, we are going to move to the main task. And students are going to be independent. They are going to use the language. Maybe they are going to create a dialogue and they present it. Probably they are going to create a collage of pictures of the activities that they did in their last vacation, or they are going to create a video and then share it in a, you know, in a group or in a platform if you have it, or they are going to write a blog and about their last vacation. Something that is important about the main task is that they are independent. They have to be the ones using the language according to the task that is assigned. Now, here I want just to make sure that you understand something that is very important. If during the pre-task, our students were exposed to oral activities, just oral activities, you know, asking questions, practicing dialogues, etc., the main task has to be an oral activity, because of course we need to be coherent. If during the pre-task our students were exposed more to readings, more to writing, short, you know, sentences or paragraphs, so the main task, of course, is going to be more about writing. So there should be always a connection, you know, between the pre-tasks and the main task, so that students can really see the connection, and that is really, you know, that as that cycle. Because sometimes teachers, we ask them to, you know, to during the pre-task to practice a dialogue, to listen to a conversation, and then to ask questions orally. And during the main task, we ask them to write a paragraph about their past activities, and they don't know how, because they didn't have the model of the language before. So we have to be very careful on that. And that is why when we are planning, we need to think about, okay, what is the learning outcome that our students describe their past activities? Okay, is this description oral or written? And you start doing, you know, backward planning. So how can I get there? How can my students get there? And that is why you have to take into consideration all those elements. So now we are just, you know, the schema activation. We identify the students' previous knowledge. During the pre-task, we give them input so that they can be able to use the language effectively. During the main task, okay, now it is your time, the students' time, you know, to produce in the language, to see if they really got it, to see if the input that they were exposed to really worked. And now let's move to the post-task. Let's suppose that our students already presented a dialogue or presented a paragraph about their last vacation. Now, during the post-task, in this specific moment, we are going to check like a specific or common language problems that they can have or that you identified. probably they had problems pronouncing the ed ending, or probably they didn't know how to ask a question, properly. So in this moment, you are going to emphasize or to practice or to give them, extra practice or input about a specific language, or a specific vocabulary or a specific pronunciation. And also, the post task is going to help you plan your next class, because based on your students' performance, based on what you identified that your students, had more problems with, so you can say, well, for next class, for next session, I know that I have to do this. I have to check more this, or I have to emphasize more time expressions, or maybe asking questions, or the difference between was and where, and so forth. So this is going to be the end of the cycle. Once that your students already presented or performed using the target language, now it is your time to check some specific language or vocabulary or pronunciation aspects, and then you as teacher reflect on the whole process and identify what they need for next session, for next class. And that's why it is a cycle. And some useful examples that I can give you, or based also on my experience. We were talking about this, right? Describing past activities. So for example, for a schema activation, asking questions to them. Okay, what did you do last weekend? Just listen to them, don't correct them. If they say, I go to the beach, I go to the mountain, okay, just listen to them. In this moment, you don't have to correct them, or you don't have to, say, oh, no, that is not past. Okay, no, just because in this moment you are identifying if they really understood the question or not, if they really can describe past activities or not. So you can ask them questions, or you can ask them, for example, oh, what did you do last night? And if they start, saying different activities, you can start writing them on the board, or you can start, I went to class. Oh, what class did you take? And you start, generating like a small talk based on what they say. Then during the pre-task, depending, in this case is describing past activities, probably I'll give them a dialogue. In a dialogue, we can practice. We can identify the language that you use. We can also use, like a video of people talking about their past activities so that they can listen to the pronunciation. If I give them a reading, I ask them, okay, let's read this. And then I ask them questions so that, of course, they know that they are using the language. So during the pre-task, this is going to be a little bit more control with my students. Then for my main task, describing past activities. If it is oral, I will ask them. Probably I really like my students, to participate and to talk. So probably I will ask them to think about their last vacation, last December, last summer, and they are going to just make drawings of what they remember. And then they try to explain to the rest of the class what they did. Why? Because remember that during the main task, it is more like independent work. It is more about what they know about the language in this moment, or how they are using the input that they received during the pre-task. So I really like my students to talk and to use the language, and they don't have to write anything or to read anything, so that they can be more spontaneous and fluent. And finally, in the post-task, as teachers, most of the time, we know what are the most difficult you know, parts of the language. So I don't know in your cases, but in my experience, when we are teaching past tense, the ed endings are always difficult. So I always prepare an activity so that I can give my students more opportunities to practice the ed ending during the post task. So I review the ed ending. I tell them, okay, let's practice this ed ending or the pronunciation of these verbs, and what is the difference between this and this, and so that they can really, identify them. Something important is that during the whole process, feedback is constant. In my role as teacher, I am always monitoring students' performance, students' understanding, and I'm giving them constant feedback. So this is like the cycle that we have. And remember, if you want to use also some warm-up activities, you can do that, but it can be or it cannot be related to the topic. But when we talk about the schema activation, pre-task, main task, and post-task, always related to the learning outcome. Everything is related to describing past activities in this case. Okay, now there are no recipes, and that is very important. What works for me, probably it's not going to work, or probably yes, to others. But that is why it's important that when we are, teaching a foreign language, we need to be and to implement a variety of activities during the pre, the task, and the post task, so that our students are exposed to the language in different contexts, and so that we can also promote different abilities. So we can have reading activities, we can have listening, we can have oral, and we can have writing activities so that they can use the language in different ways. Also for the task, always remember that it's during this specific moment, students are going to show us, they are going to use the language that they are supposed to use based on the session. And during the post task, that we can have a variety of activities too. It can be a game, it can be, more like completing some spaces, or having a keyword and asking a question. You can be very creative on that. And something important that we always need also to remember is that providing students with comprehensible input and monitoring their comprehension promotes the acquisition of a foreign language too. Okay, so that's why, if you remember at the beginning of this webinar, we were talking about different keywords, and one of them is feedback, the other one was about input, learning outcomes, because those are special, aspects that we need to take into consideration when we are planning based on this methodology or this approach. And just to finish, just remember that learning is a treasure that will follow its owner everywhere. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And in case that you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you so much, Maureen. That's a wonderful and insightful presentation. We really learned a lot from you. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Yeah. So before the questions, I may sum up, and then if I'm wrong, you can just correct me. I took notes. As far as the applying task-based learning concern, so Maureen, she just told us, first of all, a task is, first of all, a visible outcome which shows students' understanding and learning process. That's really important to know. And the use of authentic materials are really great, in terms of teaching language. And also, learners should be given opportunity to really showcase. That's really good. And the feedback and constant monitoring are really key in terms of applying task-based learning. And we've seen a task cycle as well, the task-based cycle. So the schema, which was still tricky, because I didn't get it well, because it looks like the warm up, because yeah, because warm up is not always just because warm up is getting student in the lesson. Yeah, okay, anyway, I'll come back to it. So the schema is for Maureen, schema is identifying students' previous knowledge. So at that level, please don't provide any input to students. You leave them to express themselves, yeah, as they want. And then you move to Pretask, where you're going to give now input about the lesson you're going to give, and then to get students ready. At that part, it's really important to know you should control and monitor the whole process, yeah, for the pre-task. And then you move, the next cycle will be the main task, where you're going now to leave the student to be independent. And it's up to the student to produce the language, and they have to use the target language. Yeah, and the student will maybe carry out the learning process. And finally, we pop up to the post-task. The post-task is where you're going this time to check, to have a to check specific and common language problem or mistakes. And also that will be a kind of backup for you to plan your future lessons, if I get you well. So
yeah, perfectly. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
thank you so
Great.
much. Yeah, thank you. So your questions are really welcome, dear auditor, because yeah, let me check if you do have questions. Yeah, we have questions. From Amira, our Mrs. President. She said, can you give us an example of a language task from your experience that follows this cycle?
Sure. For example, in our case, I can give you an example of our last class I was teaching. The learning out, first we need to take into consideration and to think about the learning outcome. What is the learning outcome for the class, right? So my students, the learning outcome of the class was to talk about them describing products, because it's another class. So describing products, and they are business students. So describing products, what that was the learning outcome. So when we think about that, and we apply the task-based cycle, first, the schema activation, as Musa mentioned, it's about identifying a student's previous knowledge. So what I did was, okay, I asked them, okay, you have like, choose any object that you have in this moment in the class and describe it. Tell me the features. What is it about? The size. And so they, took a pencil, a notebook, their cell phone, etc., and they started describing the object that they had in that specific moment. So I realized that they had, some previous knowledge about how to say big, small, medium size, etc., but they didn't know how to say materials, for example, or they didn't know how to give more information about the product. So this was the schema activation. Take an object that you have and describe it. Okay, what can you say about the object? How much does it cost, etc. And then we moved to the next activity, that was the pre-task. In this case, I gave them different information about different products. Okay, how can you describe a product? I gave them the difference between made of or made in, or the different materials that you can have, for describing a product. Also gave them like a specific language from readings, from videos, and so that they could identify useful language when you describe a product. And we did different activities based on that, like more control activities, get in pairs, and you have these products, describe them, mention the material. So it was more related to that. And then for the main task, what they had to do was, okay, now think about they are students, but they also work. Think about a product. Okay, think about a product that you really like, or that you have, or that your company sells, depending on each student. And then you are going to describe it. You are going to mention the features, costs. You're going to compare with this with your competition, and etc. So I gave them some time so that they could prepare that. And after that, they were sharing, like in inner circles, you know, with their classmates. This is this is the product, and then the others were asking them questions. It's it big? It's it made of leather? It's it? So they started using the language, you know, that we just checked at the beginning of the class, and they were asking questions. It said made of glass, or it said just for it's the same as this company, or what about the competition? So they were interacting using the language, and my role was just to listen to them. So I was walking around the classroom listening to them, and they were just practicing. And then during the post task, what I did was to practice a little bit the order of the adjectives, because when we describe objects, sometimes we have to say, you know, the size, color. And so what I did was to check that specific order, also to I gave them some feedback related to pronunciation, etc. And then I realized that they did it very well. Okay, they did it very well. And now for next class, probably I am going to emphasize more the comparison, you know, comparatives and superlatives, because I noticed that we need to practice more on that. So that is a class, a session, because we need to think about, we apply it for the class itself. So this was my class 2 days ago, actually.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is from our PD coordinator, project development coordinator, Mahamba. He would like to know, how can you use this task-based model to help a student in class with dyslexia challenges? Do you think the Pretask activity or Posttask be affected? Yeah.
Sure. In this case, if you have students with this kind of, you know, situation, you need to know what you need to emphasize.
Yeah.
So in this case, the pre-task is really important, that you can emphasize, you know, the language, and you can practice with that specific students that language that you really need your student to learn, acquire. And so that you can make sure that he can move or she can move to the main task. Because if a person that, you know, that has dyslexia, and just you don't monitor his or her understanding, if you go to the main task, this is more independent. And if this person is not prepared yet, so probably he or she is going to be a little bit, you know, like can get a little bit frustrated. But I think that the task base gives you the opportunity to prepare your students really well before they go independent. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Maureen. So we're still, yeah, waiting for questions. Yeah, but I do have question. Meanwhile, this is about the post task. Yeah, is it this checking, can we consider like a formative evaluation, or?
Yeah, actually, you apply formative evaluation during the whole
Yeah.
process, because you give them feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have to give them, you know, like specific comments about the language. You give them, you know, you ask them about if they are understanding, etc. During the post task is more for you to help your students to improve a specific area that you identified that they had a problem with. Okay, so maybe during their main task, you noticed that they had the same problems, or that they repeated the same mistake. Okay, so during the post task, you can do, you know, like review that specific language instruction, or you can prepare an activity so that they can check that specific grammar or that specific vocabulary, in that specific moment.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question from Emil. So Emily would like to know, do you think this work with better with the law? Sorry, can we differentiate instruction? Yeah, during the pre-task in mixed level classes to differentiate instruction.
Yes, well, I have mixed level classes,
Okay.
and I have, students with different levels, because we don't apply like a placement test in the university. So we have students that go from 1 to 6 together. And sometimes I have students with a very good level, and others that, they have a little bit more difficulties with the language. And I apply it the same, and I do the same with them. What I do is that when I am preparing my class, I have to think about that. I have to think about the context. I have to think about my students' level, and then I can start preparing a little bit, the activities. What I always do, and I want to just let you know, is that's why I was talking about providing students with comprehensible input. Krashen said that you have to give them a +1. So you have to think that this is the input that they need, the minimum, but try to give them a little bit more of that. Okay, so that your students can move, a little bit from this to the other part of the, so that they can improve their language. So what I always do is that depending on the groups, because that depends a lot on your students, but what I do is that I apply the same activities, but to them, but I monitor, of course, I monitor them differently. Okay, I'm working more with the student who has more problems, but I have realized that at the end of the day of the class, students, they describe or they succeed with the learning outcome that was expected. Some of them, of course, they do it with more fluency, probably. And the others are going to do it with maybe with not that fluent, but they use the language. And they are like, but yes, I have seen how they use it and how it works. Because you as teacher prepare the activities and the input that they need based on what your students need. And Zach.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, we have the last question. We're running out of time, but we do have one last question from our Mrs. President. She would like to know, do you think this would work better with the low level student or higher level, or both?
Actually, for both. And I have also, I have had the opportunity to teach to master students of English teachers, and I have applied the task-based also for master students and for English teachers, and it has worked because it's a methodology that gives you like an insight of the whole learning process. Okay, you need to identify what they know, you need to give them input, and then they have to, do something to show that if they understand, and then we are going to wrap up the process with identifying what we need to improve. So I have used this with language learning students, with teachers, with different, I was teaching another course about using technology, nothing related to language, and I also use it. And the methodology really works.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much. We still have time. So if you do have any questions, otherwise, But meanwhile, I do have, it's not a question, but it might be kind of contribution, because the Posttask, I do use it because I'm teaching in a higher education school, but of aviation. So there I use what, instead of the Posttask, I use exit ticket. So by the end, Yeah, you
Mhm.
see, so that's what I use most of the time. So at the end of the class, before leaving student to go out, so they have to really write on Padlet. So I use Padlet a lot, e-portfolio. So they will tell me what are the three things they learned from the session, what are the most interesting part, and which part they need to develop. So those three questions they have to each session. At the end of each session, I do that with my student here.
It is very important that not only you as teacher reflect on the process that just happened, but also to ask your students how was it? If they, okay, if you understood questions, and actually that's why I really like the task base, because during the main task, you can really identify if students can do it or not. If during the main task you are monitoring and you see that they are not doing well, they have a lot of questions, or they just, you feel like their frustration with the language, okay, so maybe you need to just stop for a moment and go back to the pre-task and give them more input so that they can feel more confident with the use of the language. And then when you realize, for example, like as I was saying 2 days ago with my class, during the main task, I was just monitoring them and they were very confident with the language. So it is great. Sometimes that happens and sometimes no. So you have to, okay, monitor. Okay, let's go back to the pre-tasks, and so that you can be ready to the next one.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and also this reminded me another concept I've been using back in 2010. We call it the KWL chart. I don't know if you're familiar with it. So the K is what do you know about the lesson, and the second, the W is what do you want to know, and the last is what do you learn. So it's really great. Also, it's like this the same cycle. You check first of all, like the the pre-task. You check what students know about the topic, and then so any question? Yeah. So okay, I think there is no question. So yeah,
Perfect.
you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much.
If there is no question, I think Mrs. President, any word, or we can conclude.
Thank you, Musa. I don't have anything to add. I just wanted to say thank you, Maureen, for this presentation. And I think it's going to be very helpful for our teachers, especially those who are interested in submitting open educational resources, because Africa ELTA started a project for creating open educational resources. And one thing we have been also discussing with our members is how to design the lessons based on a task-based approach. And this was in the feedback we gave to the people who submitted OERs to us. So this is very helpful, Maureen, and thank you very much for offering it to us.
No, thank you, and I'm happy to be here, really, and hope that everybody has a great day. And in case that you have any questions, you just can contact me. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much, Maureen. So before ending, on behalf of Africa ELTA, because of Africa ELTA stands for Africa English Language Teacher Associations. So in the case of permanent professional development training for our African teachers and abroad, so we initiate such kind of webinars. So we would like to really thank you for giving us this tremendous opportunity to really share this great presentation that is going to really polish the teaching and shaping the way our teachers are teaching. Thank you so much. And definitely before ending, I would like to end with this quote I really love a lot. He who dares to teach must never cease to learn. The day you decided to teach is that day you should decide to learn for everlasting until the last breath. So we're permanent learners. Our teacher, we're permanent learners. And today we really learn something new from you, and we hope to really use it in the appropriate way in the future. Thank you so much from Costa Rica, Maureen Guevara. We really appreciate your presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so bye-bye, everyone. Thank you so much, dear viewers, yeah, around Africa and the globe. Thank you so much for attending. Bye-bye.